On winter nights in Seoul, when the river turned to black glass and the wind cut through every expensive coat, people in the underworld whispered one name with fear. They called her Madam Jang, the invisible boss who ended wars with a single phone call and buried enemies in contracts instead of graves. In the same city, in bright magazine covers and charity galas, those same people smiled for the camera beside a different woman, Sandra, the elegant Korean-American philanthropist who donated to orphanages and recreated lives from ruin. No one dared to connect the two women. No one believed the monster and the angel were the same beating heart. Sandra had grown up far from the glitter. Her first memory of kindness was not from family, but from a stranger who wrapped a coat around her thin shoulders outside a burning restaurant in Busan. Her parents had died in that fire, collateral damage in a turf war they never understood. The man who saved her, Chairman Jang, would become the closest thing she had to a father. He fed her, educated her, and then very slowly shaped her into something sharp enough to protect what he had built. Sandra learned numbers before she learned lullabies. She learned what fear looked like in a grown man's eyes before she knew the softness of her own smile. Yet even as she rose through the ranks, she carried a small, stubborn tenderness like a secret flame. She visited the same kind of orphanages that once rejected her for being too broken, and she wrote checks without ever signing her real name. When she took control of the organization after Jang's stroke, she did it with a single condition no one understood: less blood, more brains. "We fight with contracts," she told the old lieutenants. "We become the storm people never see coming." She stopped street wars, negotiated peace between rival gangs, and quietly paid hospital bills for the families who would never know who their silent savior was. Keanu entered her world on a rainy afternoon that smelled like traffic and wet stone. He had that tired look people get when they've seen too much and slept too little, the look of a man who carried other people's ghosts. An ex-investigator from Los Angeles, he had drifted to Seoul as a security consultant, promising himself this job would be simple: protect a famous philanthropist during a charity expansion, get paid, go home. When he first saw Sandra stepping down from her car, umbrella held over a child instead of herself, he filed her under good people almost without thinking. It wasn't her beauty that stopped him. It was the way she crouched to the kids' level and listened, like the whole world had shrunk to that tiny voice. The first time they spoke, it was in the echo of an empty museum wing she was restoring. He walked beside her, taking note of exits and shadows, while she talked about bringing art classes to kids who had never owned a single crayon. There was a softness in her voice when she spoke about them, and something inside Keanu, hardened by years of violence, loosened just a little. He noticed how she remembered every staff member's name, how she thanked the janitor as respectfully as she greeted the mayor. He told himself he was only observing a client building a profile. But when she laughed at one of his dry jokes, head tilted back, ease breaking through her perfect control, he felt a warmth he hadn't expected to feel again. What he didn't see were the late-night calls in a language she slipped into when she was tired, the frozen mask on her face as she ordered shipments that never appeared on any invoice, the dossiers that crossed her desk showing faces she had to decide would live or vanish. At night, in a penthouse lit by a single lamp, Sandra switched from silk to shadow. One phone in her hand held the lives of innocent children she funded. The other held the power to destroy men who threatened her empire. She moved between them like a dancer, stepping from one spotlight to another, never letting either side see how much it cost her. On the third week of the project, a small detail cracked the edge of her calm. Keanu walked into her office with a thin file and a crease between his eyebrows. "Someone's probing your accounts," he said quietly, laying down photos of men she knew all too well, rivals who believed Madam Jang was finally weak enough to challenge. Sandra's pulse spiked, not from fear of them, but from the danger of him standing that close to the truth. He thought he was warning a philanthropist about criminals. He had no idea he had just drawn a line straight toward the woman who ruled them. She thanked him, voice even, but when he left the room and the door clicked shut, her hands trembled around the file. On her private phone, a message lit up in Korean: "Eliminate the consultant before he learns too much." It came from the very council of old men she had been fighting to keep on a cleaner path. For a long moment, she just stared at the words, feeling the weight of every life she had tried to save pressing down on this one choice. Outside the glass wall of her office, Keanu stood in the hallway, talking kindly to a nervous intern, completely unaware. Sandra turned the screen off, her reflection a blurred ghost over the black glass. To keep the empire stable, to keep the orphanages funded, to keep the fragile peace she had built, the simplest move was clear. Obey the order and cut him out of her story forever. But as she watched him from a distance, laughing gently, handing his umbrella to the intern before stepping into the rain himself, a different thought rose in her chest, sharp and terrifying. For the first time since she took the throne of the Korean Mafia, Sandra Bullock, Madam Jang, angel of the poor, found herself whispering a question she had no answer for. If I spare him, how many others will pay the price? And if I don't, what kind of person does that make me now? Rain hammered the glass walls of Sandra's penthouse as if the sky itself wanted to break in and drag her secrets out. She sat barefoot on the cold marble floor, back against the couch, the message on her private phone still glowing like a wound. Eliminate the consultant before he learns too much. Outside, the river glimmered with the lights of the city she had sworn to protect in her own twisted way. Inside, the woman everyone feared as Madam Jang was just Sandra again. Tired, angry at herself for hesitating, and more afraid of one man's smile than of 100 guns. She closed her eyes and saw Chairman Jang's face the way it had been when she was 17, the night he first brought her into a real strategy meeting. The room had smelled of ink, tobacco, and old leather. Maps of the city lay spread across the table, dots marking territories, names scribbled along the borders like small death sentences. "Listen to me," he had said, his voice low, heavy with a kind of fatal tenderness. "Power is not kind. If you want to protect something, you must be willing to cut away what threatens it. 1 life, 10 lives, 100, you count them not with your heart but with your head." She had nodded because she owed him everything, but later that night she had stood on a bridge, staring at the dark water, wondering when exactly a saved child became a sharpened weapon. Over the years, she had given those quiet orders more times than she wanted to admit. A corrupt cop selling kids to traffickers. A rival who burned down a shelter just to send her a message. Men who thought breaking her peace would bring back the old chaos they missed. She had watched their files cross her desk, listened to her advisors explain the risks, then set the pen down on the final line. Every time, she told herself the same thing. This is the price of keeping more innocent people safe. But looking at Keanu's name on an encrypted screen, listed not as a man but as a liability, that old logic suddenly felt thin and selfish, like a blanket full of holes. Across the city, in a small rented apartment that didn't match the size of his experience, Keanu sat at his own kitchen table long after he should have been asleep. A cheap fan hummed in the corner. The file he had shown Sandra lay open in front of him, papers weighted by a chipped coffee mug. He had promised himself that Seoul would be different, that here he would just be a bodyguard, not a man chasing ghosts through crime scenes. Yet somewhere between the polite charity meetings and the careful way Sandra spoke about restructuring neighborhoods, he had felt the old itch under his skin, the one that wouldn't let him ignore inconsistencies. His phone buzzed with a number from Lowe's Angels. He hesitated, then answered. His former partner's voice came through, rough, familiar. "You still playing babysitter overseas?" she asked, then lowered her tone. "Listen, we've got something big. International intel on a Korean mafia boss. Code name Madam Jang. She's bleeding money through charities, shell companies, social projects. Real spiderweb stuff." Keanu's eyes drifted to the glossy brochure on his table, the same logo Sandra's foundation used printed in soft blue. His chest tightened, but he forced his voice to stay neutral. "What do you need from me?" There was a brief pause. "Eyes," his old partner said. "You're on the ground. Anything you see, any pattern you tell me, off the record." When he hung up, the apartment felt smaller. He looked again at Sandra's smiling photo on the brochure and shook his head. "No," he murmured to himself. "She's not that." Still, he made a mental note of the dates, the accounts, the strange overlaps. Habit was a hard thing to kill. The next morning at the foundation, the air buzzed with preparations for a major gala. Florists drifted through the hallways with buckets of white lilies, and tech crews tested sound equipment, their voices echoing off high ceilings. Keanu walked the perimeter, checking security placements, but his gaze kept catching on details that didn't fit the polished surface. Extra cameras in places that weren't on his specs. A locked door on the 12th floor that appeared nowhere in the blueprints he'd been given. Men in tailored suits who moved like they were trained for something harsher than carrying clipboards. When Sandra joined him in the main atrium, dressed simply in black, clipboard in hand, he decided to push, gently. "There's a door upstairs that your staff forgot to mention," he said, keeping his tone calm, almost casual. "No label, heavy lock, private collection." For a moment something flickered across her face, too fast to name. Then she smiled, controlled and warm. "Old archive room," she replied. "Paperwork from when we bought this building. It's a mess. You know how foundations are, more files than actual help sometimes." Her answer was smooth, but Keanu had spent too many years reading more in what people didn't say. Still, when she touched his arm and added quietly, "If it worries you, we can have it cleared after the event," he felt that same tug of trust. There was a humility in the way she deferred to his judgment, rare among the wealthy. He nodded, but a small seed of doubt had been planted. That afternoon, behind a soundproof door in a different part of the city, Sandra faced the council of older men who technically worked for her but still thought of themselves as the true spine of the organization. The room was dim, smoke curling toward a circular skylight. Folders and tablets lay on the table, graphs and numbers glowing coldly. "The foreign consultant is already asking questions," one of them said, pushing a report toward her. "We intercept his calls. He's in contact with overseas law enforcement. You know the math. One man dies, our operations continue. We stall, and the government freezes every account connected to your good deeds." The way he said "good deeds" left a sour taste in her mouth, as if kindness were a weakness instead of the only thing keeping her from becoming what they wanted her to be. Sandra read the report slowly, buying herself seconds. "He's not an enemy," she said. "He's doing his job. If we remove him, we confirm every suspicion the authorities have. The heat will be worse." Another council member leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Then let it look like street crime, a tourist in the wrong alley. We've already arranged the team. We only need your word, Madam Jang." The title pinned her to the chair. She thought of children painting murals in the shelters her money kept open, nurses in free clinics, families getting food vouchers. All of it balanced on these men's obedience and her own capacity to make brutal choices. She signed the paper authorizing contingency measures, but her hand shook. And when she set the pen down, a line had been drawn inside her that she could no longer ignore. Night fell thick and fast, swallowing the city in neon and shadow. The gala building emptied slowly, staff heading home, lights winking out one by one. Keanu did a final sweep, satisfied with the lockups, then took the side exit to where his car waited in a narrow service alley behind the tower. The air smelled of rain and oil. His footsteps echoed against the concrete walls. Halfway to his car, he felt it, that subtle tightening in the air, that old instinct humming in his spine. He pretended not to notice, lengthening his stride, hand drifting closer to the small weapon at his back. The first man stepped out from behind a dumpster, then another from the shadows near the stairs, then two more at the alley's far end. No words, just the quiet certainty of a trap snapping shut. Keanu's mind flashed through options. He spoke anyway, voice steady. "Whatever you think you're about to do, walk away. I don't want trouble." The answer came in the form of metal glinting under a street lamp. They rushed him. Training and muscle memory took over. He moved fast, blocking, striking, turning their momentum against them, but they were many and the alley was tight. A blow caught his ribs, another clipped his jaw. He tasted blood, stumbled, forced himself back up. Courage was no good without resilience, he thought grimly, and resilience hurt. Just as one attacker raised a knife for a final decisive strike, white headlights exploded at the mouth of the alley, freezing everyone in a harsh glare. Tires screeched. A black sedan spun sideways, blocking the exit. The rear window rolled down a few centimeters, just enough for the muzzle of a suppressed gun to appear. The shots were quick, precise, two in the shoulder, one in a leg, another shattering a knife hand. Men dropped, cursing, bleeding but alive. Whoever was in that car wasn't aiming to kill, only to end the fight. Keanu shielded his eyes, trying to see past the glare. In the faint slice of interior light, he caught the outline of a woman's profile, hair pulled back, posture unnervingly calm. Something about the shape of her jaw, the tilt of her head, pulled at a recognition he couldn't place in the chaos. Before he could move closer, the window slid up and the sedan shot forward, disappearing into the traffic as if the alley had spit out a ghost. One of the wounded men gasped, reaching for Keanu's pant leg, fingers slick with his own blood. Keanu knelt automatically, grabbing his wrist to stop the bleeding. Who sent you? He demanded. The man's eyes rolled, pain and fear battling inside them. He forced out a single broken word in Korean, the name almost lost in a rasping breath. Keanu leaned closer. Say it again. The answer came in a whisper that cut through him like ice. Madam Jang. The man collapsed, unconscious, leaving Keanu crouched alone in the flickering alley light, heart pounding, the echo of that name colliding with the image of a woman who handed umbrellas to interns and talked about crayons for orphans. Blood dried stiff on Keanu's shirt by the time he reached his apartment. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror, pressing a cold cloth to his split lip, watching the bruises rise along his ribs. The name Madam Jang replayed in his head like a siren. He opened his laptop, pulled up the offshore reports his old partner had sent, and lined them up beside the Foundation's public records. Dates overlapped too neatly. Donations appeared the same day certain shell companies received sudden consulting fees. He had felt like staring at a picture that would not come into focus because he did not want it to. He thought about the car in the alley, the clean shots that spared lives instead of ending them, the outline of a woman's face half hidden by darkness. Some stranger had saved him from men who claimed to serve Madam Jang. If Sandra truly was that boss, why not let them finish the job? Why fire warning shots instead? The question settled in his chest, heavy enough that he grabbed his jacket again. Answers would not come from a laptop. They were hidden behind that locked door on the 12th floor. Hours after midnight, the Foundation tower stood mostly dark, its glass shell reflecting the city like a quiet lake. Keanu bypassed security with the codes he was paid to know, moving through the empty corridors like a shadow. On the 12th floor, the unmarked door waited, same heavy lock, small metal plate warm under his fingers. It took him less than a minute to open. What lay beyond stole his breath. The room was no dusty archive. Screens lined the walls, some looping footage from harbor warehouses, others showing numbers that shifted in real time. Accounts, shipments, coded messages. A large map of the city hung over a central table, pins and lines connecting markets, ports, and charities in a web that made too much sense. In the middle lay a slim folder with his name on it. Photos of him arriving at the airport, standing beside Sandra at public events, a copy of his passport, a list of his known associates. Next to it, almost casually, an old photograph. Sandra as a teenager, standing beside Chairman Jang, both smiling at a ribbon cutting for a community center he now saw as a front. He didn't hear the door close behind him, only the soft click of the lock sliding back into place. Keanu turned. Sandra was there, still in the black dress from earlier meetings, makeup faded, hair falling loose as if she'd been pulling at it. For a long beat they just stared at each other, no charity staff, no counsel, no guards, only two people standing in the center of a truth neither could now dodge. Her voice, when it came, was quiet and stripped of performance. You weren't supposed to see this yet, she said, and you weren't supposed to survive that alley. She took one step toward him, eyes shining with something far more dangerous than anger. But you did, so now I have to ask you a question I've never trusted anyone enough to ask in my life. She walked past him to the table, fingers brushing the edges of the files with a kind of exhausted affection, like a parent touching a child they no longer recognized. This is what they see, Sandra said, nodding at the screens. Power, control, a perfect machine, Madam Jang the ghost behind everything. She turned to face him, and for the first time he saw how tired her eyes really were. But this, she pointed to a second stack of folders, stamped with the Foundation's logo, is what I built with the same money. Clinics, shelters, food programs. Every crime they committed paid for something that wasn't crime at all. Keanu's throat felt dry. And the men who tried to kill me, he asked. Was that charity work too? She flinched just once. No, she said. That was me losing a vote. The council decided you were a threat. They sent a team under my name. She held his gaze without looking away. I could have stopped them by ordering something worse, by starting a war I've spent 10 years trying to prevent. So instead I did the only thing I could in the time I had. She pointed to a small monitor in the corner. Grainy footage of the alley fight played back, time-stamped, angles from a hidden camera. The sedan appeared, shots fired with surgical precision. That was my car, she said softly. My gun. I told them to scare you away, not bury you. He felt anger rise, but it wasn't clean. It tangled with the memory of her talking to children, paying respect to staff no one else saw. You ordered the hit, he said, and you saved me from it. The contradiction hurt his head. Why? Sandra laughed once without humor. Because I am two people, she replied. The girl who was rescued from a fire and the woman raised to build one big enough to burn a city. I thought I could use this place to turn the empire into something good before the old men died. But they're not dying. They're multiplying. She took a breath that sounded almost like a plea. I need help to end this without losing everything we've saved. He stepped closer, studying her, stripping away glamour and legend until all he saw was a human being shaking in front of him. You're asking me, he said slowly, to help a mafia boss bring down her own organization. She nodded. Not to protect them, to transfer their power into light where everyone can see it and take what they need from it. The accounts, the leaders, the proof, it's all here. It just needs someone the police might actually trust. Her eyes searched his. I thought I could do it alone. I was wrong. Silence settled between them, thick and electric. Keanu thought of his partner in Lowe's angels waiting for intel, of the victims in his old case files whose names still woke him at night, of the kids he'd seen in Sandra's shelters holding crayons like treasures. Duty pulled one way, compassion the other. There was no path that would not hurt someone. If I say yes, he finally said, I won't be your bodyguard anymore. I won't lie for you. I'll bring everything to the authorities, including you. For the first time, her shoulders loosened, like someone had finally spoken aloud the sentence she'd been living under for years. Good, she whispered. That's the only way it means anything. He nodded, decision burning through his doubt. Then we do it together, he said. No more half measures, no more alley ambushes. She exhaled shakily, a single tear cutting through the careful mask on her face, and reached for the main power switch. Then tomorrow night at the gala, she answered, we end Madam Jang for good. As the room plunged into darkness, leaving only the faint glow of emergency lights on their faces, Keanu felt his phone buzz in his pocket. His old partner's name on the screen, calling again, unaware that he was standing beside the very woman they had hunted for years. Music drifted through the grand hall like sweet smoke the next evening, violins wrapping themselves around the soft clink of glasses and practiced laughter. Politicians, CEOs, and quiet criminals in elegant suits mixed under crystal chandeliers, all congratulating Sandra on another miracle year for her foundation. Cameras flashed. Speeches were rehearsed. No one noticed that the security presence was thicker than usual, or that some of the waiters moved with the alert calm of undercover officers. Backstage, Sandra adjusted the small microphone at her collar, watching her reflection in the dressing room mirror. The woman staring back wore a flawless gown and diamond earrings, but her hands trembled as she smoothed the fabric. On the table beside her sat a single envelope addressed to the district prosecutor, sealed with evidence her lawyers would have called career suicide. Full account numbers, council member identities, contracts linking charitable projects to money laundering rings. She had signed a statement that morning, prepared to face years behind bars. Oddly, the thought left her breathing easier than any luxury spa ever had. In a side corridor, Keanu spoke into a tiny earpiece, coordinating two currents of protection at once. Stage left clear. Balcony team check in. Half the men answering were his hired guards. The other half belonged to an international task force his old partner now led, flown in quietly under the cover of a trade delegation. He had sent her everything. The files from the locked room, the plan for Sandra's confession, even his own doubts. The reply had been simple. If she's truly turning, we catch the rest while she stands on that stage. No heroics. No cowboy moves. He had agreed, but his chest still felt tight with the knowledge that once this night was over, none of them would walk away untouched. When Sandra stepped out into the lights, applause rose like a wave. For a brief moment, she saw only faces of people who believed her to be pure light. It pierced her more sharply than any insult. She spoke the usual opening lines, thanking donors, honoring volunteers, her voice steady by force of habit. Then she paused, fingers tightening around the sides of the podium. There is something you don't know about me, she began, throat raw. In the shadows of the balcony, Keanu saw movement. An older man from the council whispering urgently into his phone, realizing too late what was coming. Sandra took a breath and dropped the first piece of truth. This foundation was built with money that did not come from miracles, she said. It came from fear, from a criminal empire you call the Korean Mafia, and its leader is standing right here. The room froze, gasps. A glass shattered somewhere. Cameras flashed faster, some hands fumbling to shut them off, others lifting their phones higher. On the balcony, the councilman's face twisted with rage. He drew a concealed pistol, aiming not at Sandra but at the crowd, hostages to force an escape. Keanu moved before his brain finished forming the thought. He sprinted up the side stairs, shouting into his mic, "Balcony 1, weapon drawn," as chaos exploded below. People screamed, chairs overturned, security tried to push guests to the exits. Sandra stood firm at the podium, refusing to duck, refusing to run, eyes locked on the man who had once called her daughter in a boardroom full of knives. The councilman fired a wild shot into the ceiling, showering plaster and sparks. He swung the gun toward her. Keanu hit him from the side at the last second. The shot went off, grazing the edge of the podium, tearing through Sandra's shoulder instead of her heart. She staggered but stayed standing, one hand pressed to the sudden dark bloom on her dress. Officers swarmed the balcony, weapons trained, voices overlapping. The councilman wrestled, spat curses, screamed that he would burn everything she loved. As they pinned him down, Sandra lifted her good arm, microphone still live, breath shaking but words clear. "This is what happens," she said into the stunned silence below, "when we let fear decide who deserves to be safe. I am guilty, but so are the men who hid beside your tables tonight." Sirens wailed outside as task force teams poured into the hall, moving methodically toward the entrances and private lounges where other council members tried to flee. Guests watched, stunned, as powerful figures were handcuffed in front of them, masks slipping in real time. Keanu looked down from the balcony, chest heaving, eyes locking with Sandra, across the chaos. She gave him a small, almost apologetic smile, blood running down her arm. The last thing he saw before medics surrounded her was the calm in her face, the look of someone who had finally stopped running from who she was. Months later, the city felt quieter, as if some constant background hum had finally faded. Headlines had been brutal at first. Charity angel revealed as Mafia boss, Madam Jang stuns nation with public confession. Trials followed. Council members who had once ruled entire districts now stood in chains, their carefully hidden crimes laid bare. The government seized vast sums of money, and under pressure from the public, much of it was redirected to the same shelters and clinics Sandra had once funded in secret, but this time under transparent management. Sandra spent those months in a secure facility, technically a prison, though one with bright white walls and a small garden she was allowed to walk in at certain hours. Her shoulder healed with an ugly scar. She wore plain clothes, no jewelry. Reporters begged for interviews, she refused them all. Instead, she taught language classes to other inmates, helped write letters for women who couldn't read well, and spent long evenings sitting on a bench beneath a thin tree, wondering if the children in her programs felt betrayed or relieved now that they knew who had paid for their crayons. One gray afternoon, a guard unlocked the garden gate and cleared his throat. "You have a visitor," he said. Sandra rose, expecting another lawyer. Instead, Keanu waited for her in the small visiting room, dressed simply, hair a little longer, eyes carrying both weariness and something gentler. For a moment, neither of them spoke. So much of what tied them together now lived in the spaces between words. "I read the judge's statement," he said finally, sitting across from her. "Reduced sentence, cooperation, testimony, you did more than they expected." She shrugged, the old arrogance gone. "I did what I should have done years ago," she answered. "The hard part wasn't confessing, it was admitting I'm not the hero in my own story, just someone who took too long to choose the right side." She looked down at her hands, calloused again from work. "Do the kids still have the clinics?" He nodded. "Yeah." "Different name on the sign, same nurses. They know the money came from seized assets. Some of them know your name, they talk about you like someone complicated who still saved them." Her eyes shone, but she didn't let the tears fall. "Complicated," she repeated softly. "I can live with that." Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "For what it's worth," he said, "I don't think you were playing both sides to stay powerful. I think you were trapped between the world that built you and the world you wished existed. In the end, you burned the first one down so the second could breathe. That matters." She studied him for a long moment, humility and gratitude threading through the pain. "You could have hated me," she said. "You had every right." He offered a small, tired smile. "Some days I tried," he admitted. But every time I remembered the kids with their crayons and the way you stood on that stage while a gun pointed at you, hate didn't fit. A buzzer sounded, signaling the end of visiting hours. They both stood. At the doorway, Sandra paused. "When I get out," she said, not knowing exactly when that would be, "I won't have money or power, just time." She met his eyes. "If someone like me tries to work in the light, do you think anyone will let her?" Keanu thought of his own mistakes, of careers broken and rebuilt, of people he had once arrested who now volunteered at shelters. "Some won't," he said honestly. "But the ones who matter will. Start small. One person at a time. You were dangerous when you hid in the dark, Sandra. Imagine what you can do when you're only allowed to help." The guard opened the door. As she stepped back into the corridor, Sandra felt an unfamiliar sensation settle in her chest. Not power, not fear, but a quiet, stubborn hope. She had lost everything she once thought defined her. The empire, the titles, the illusion of purity. What remained was the thing she had almost buried under all that weight. The girl shivering outside a burning building, wrapped in a stranger's coat, deciding whether to grow into a weapon or a shield. For the first time, she chose for herself, without orders, without blood calculations. She chose to be a shield, even if it meant standing alone. And somewhere beyond the walls, in a city learning to trust the morning again, children dipped crayons into bright colors, drawing futures they didn't yet know they owed to a woman who had finally learned that the bravest way to hold power was to let it go.